From deep within our hidden volcano laboratory, a podcast about gaming from the people who bring your games to life. These are your core elements. Core Elements, episode 66, recorded on September 18th, 2014. I am Wes Wilson, and once again, we have no Spencer Williams, but we do have with us Ryan S. Dancey of GoblinWorks, and you work on Pathfinder Online. Welcome.
Oh, glad to be here.
Now, GoblinWorks was put together how long ago?
GoblinWorks is a spin-out from Paizo Publishing, and we created the company in the early part of 2012. But we have been working on our Pathfinder Online game since October, November of 2011. And
like a lot of people are kind of iffy about new RPGs. What are you guys bringing to Pathfinder Online that you're excited about and that you think will make it stand out?
So what we're building is a fantasy sandbox MMO. We view the MMO world as having two halves: theme park games, which are like World of Warcraft, and sandbox games, which are like EVE Online. And most of the games that you will play, most of the games that are in the market right now are theme park games. And those are great, and they do really well. But they have some problems. And one of the biggest problems they have is that they're not great investments. They don't generate a lot of return on the money that you spend to build them. Sandbox games are different. They're typically smaller budget games. They take a lot longer to build and grow an audience, but financially, they're a much better product to build. And there aren't a lot of them. So there are lots and lots and lots of theme park games. There's a very small number of sandbox games. So we're kind of competing in the smaller niche, but the less crowded niche.
And you guys did this with a Kickstarter. Will you tell me the story behind that idea and where you went from there?
Yeah, we've actually done two Kickstarters. Our first Kickstarter we ran in the early part of 2012, and it was to help us finance the production of a technology demo. In video gaming, it's very common that before a project goes into full production, a vertical slice of the game is built as a way to show potential investors that the team has the technical ability to deliver the promises that they're saying they're going to be able to deliver, to show that there's some cohesion and that there's a good strategy and that the various technical people have the technical ability to do what they say they're going to do. We asked for $50,000 in that Kickstarter. We raised $307,000, and that was amazing and really awesome. And we used those funds to build our technology demo, and we finished the tech demo right around the end of the year. And at the same time, we launched a second Kickstarter to fund a portion of the total budget for the full game itself. And we asked for $1 million. We raised just over $1 million. So all in, we've raised about $1.4 million from Kickstarter, which is pretty cool. Well, and it was definitely a huge step up for us.
And that's something interesting. A lot of people are starting to doubt the ability for Kickstarter to raise quality funds for video games the way things have been lately, other than, indie projects that are going to be designed with or without the existing Kickstarter funds. Where do you think your audience for this came from? Do you think it was mostly from the MMO crowd, or do you think it was Pathfinder fans wanting to see their game go online?
Yeah, I think it was absolutely the Pathfinder community. I tell people that Kickstarter is a place that you can reach out to and monetize an existing community. It's not a place to start a community. And we were really fortunate because we are working within the Paizo ecosystem that our project came with a built-in audience of all the people who love the Pathfinder tabletop role-playing game. There are definitely a lot of people who love MMOs who are interested in our game, but our initial primary audience for the Kickstarter was absolutely people that already were familiar with Pathfinder, the tabletop RPG.
Well, and Pathfinder is just such an interesting story in and of itself. I mean, it's basically overtaken Dungeons & Dragons, in my eyes, as the primary, generic fantasy MMO. Why do you think that happened? What do you think it is about Pathfinder that made it take D&D and shove its face in the dirt?
Well, here's the thing, right? You write a great business plan and you have a great idea for a company and you execute on it really, really hard, and then a miracle occurs. And that's what's happened with Paizo. The miracle was that Wizards of the Coast dropped the ball on the transition from 3rd edition to 4th edition. And Paizo was ideally positioned to swoop in at that opportunity and execute on creating a game that the fans clearly wanted to be a part of. And they were positioned to do that because they had set themselves up to be in the right place at the right time. They were the prior licensees from Wizards for Dungeon and Dragon magazine, and they were able to directly talk to 50 to 100,000 players of the game, and have a relationship with them directly. They had already begun to do some e-commerce operations and sell some stuff. They had already made a few products on their own and had sold them. So when Wizards decided to let the licenses for Dungeons and Dragons terminate, that kind of put Paizo into an existential situation. Are they going to exist or not? And their options were basically shut the company down or figure out something that they could do to replace all the revenue from those magazines. And it was kind of an easy step for them to say, let's just keep doing what we're doing and turn the adventures that we've been generating for Dungeon into adventures for our own game. Let's make a game to be the foundation of our company. And then just relentless quality execution. They make a great product. They make it on time. They work really hard to talk with their community and get their community deeply involved in everything that they do. They are a community-focused company. Well, everything they do is informed by what their community wants to do. And the community of people who gravitated to the Pathfinder role-playing game were the people that were left in the dark when Wizards decided to shift to 4th edition. And having the miracle occur, everything that's happened since then is attributable to the fact that Paizo is just a really well-managed company run by really talented people that's really well connected to their fan base.
What do you think? What do you think the disconnect was with 4th edition that made it so that it didn't reconnect with Dungeons and Dragons fans? So
I can't speak for Wizards, and I wasn't there during any of these decisions. So what I know about the strategy of 4th edition kind of comes to me, third and fourth hand. But this is kind of my opinion. I think Wizards made a really good decision, which was that they needed to respond to the rise of MMOs. The rapid growth of MMOs in 2000 to 2010 has had a really tremendous effect on tabletop role-playing game player groups. And Wizards is a fairly data-driven company, and they knew that was happening, and they knew they had to respond. So when I look at 4th edition, what I see is a good strategic decision, which is respond to the rise of MMOs, that just didn't work.
Yeah.
The 4th edition game is a really good game, and I know a lot of really good game designers who will tell you mechanically that the game is incredibly well designed. And it kind of has that good fit where it does what it's supposed to do. The problem is that the people that they were selling it to didn't want to do that thing. And that was the miracle, right? It turned out that the direction Wizards went, while it was a strategically good choice, was a tactical failure. The players who are still active in the tabletop RPG market aren't interested in playing a game that is more like an MMO than a traditional tabletop RPG. And having committed themselves to doing 4th edition and following that strategy, Wizards was kind of in the wilderness for 5 years, which is tough. It's tough to, as a company, it's tough to say, we made a mistake, we have to stop, we have to reboot, we have to rethink, we have to go back to the drawing board. It's really, really hard to do that. And it took them a long time to recycle and get ready to do 5th edition.
And you were instrumental. This is not you being involved with Pathfinder is not strange, because you actually kind of were very important in the shaping of Wizards of the Coast being involved with D&D. What role did you play in the Wizards acquisition of TSR?
Yeah,
I'm sure you've never told this story before in your whole life.
No, this is all new. Yeah. So I co-founded a company called Five Rings Publishing Group, and our flagship product is the Legend of the Five Rings trading card game. And that company was built to either grow very fast and become a top 5 hobby game publishing house, or to be acquired by Wizards of the Coast. We knew one of those two things was going to happen very quickly after we founded the company. And so we were always looking for a strategic opportunity to make a good fit with Wizards. And by pure random chance, the guy that we hired to be the CEO of Five Rings Publishing was a guy named Bob Abramowitz. And in Bob's early years, he had worked with Lorraine Williams, who was the CEO and primary owner of TSR. And so when we became aware that TSR had run into financial problems, Bob was able to work his network and set up a meeting with her and have a very heartfelt conversation about the future of TSR and the future of Dungeons and Dragons and what he thought he could bring to the table in terms of kind of getting her out of the financial mess that TSR found itself in. So we negotiated a right to purchase TSR at a certain price. And then we flew back to Seattle and contacted Peter Atkinson, who is the CEO of Wizards of the Coast. And we let him know that we had that option in hand and that if he wanted to be able to exercise that option himself, he would have to acquire our company in the process of acquiring TSR. And that all happened. That was a good deal. A good deal for Wizards and a good deal for TSR and a good deal for us. It was interesting.
That just amazes me that you could basically have an idea for your company and then walk in with another company and go, look, you can have us, but here you get this too. That seems almost way too business savvy for a gaming techno nerd. Like, how do you view yourself like as part of the gaming ecosystem? Do you see yourself as more of a, rules grognard, or do you see yourself as, a stock trader?
So I would say neither of those things. I view myself as a person who is all about finding great opportunities and then putting the pieces of the puzzle together so that those opportunities can come to fruition. So I'm not so much interested in the abstract nature of buying and selling businesses. I'm interested in creating really awesome outcomes. My life goal is to find the hardest problem available to me and then try to find really creative solutions to solve that problem. And hobby gaming is full of interesting problems to try and solve. And TSR was a huge problem, and it required a really creative solution.
That's just amazing to me. Well, we'll talk some more about what you do and talk a little bit more about Pathfinder Online in a while. But first, lab notes. So as part of like trying to grok my kids a little more, I have decided to pick up Pokemon.
Okay.
It's been a really weird experience because as someone who has been involved in gaming all of his life, I have never touched really a Pokemon game. And so I have in my possession Pokemon Pearl that I borrowed from a good friend of ours, the DeToros, and I started playing it. And I am laughing at myself because I honestly feel that Pokemon has more in common with Facebook games than it does with actual like console video games.
Okay.
It feels like a Farmville-esque simulator where yes, there are some challenges, but I'm not sure it's not just slogging endlessly back and forth, leveling up your things. And it's funny because I really thought I was gonna enjoy it more. And instead, like, I come to new cities and I find myself, they're like, oh, well, we've got this contest where you can pretty up your Pokemon and put them on stage and we'll grade them and you win prizes. And I'm like, I don't care about that. Why would I want to do that? And it feels like every new city has this new game mechanic introduction that I am questionably interested in. And I gotta tell you, I'm obsessively playing it to the point of almost not playing anything else lately, but I think it's one of those games that I'm not sure I really enjoy. I think it's more of a exercise in busy work, like a Farmville, than it is a fun and entertaining game. I'm I'm going to be interested to try out my children bought X and Y, and I'm gonna try those out eventually. I hear the new versions of the game are a lot more new user friendly. But all in all, my experience with Pokemon so far is not necessarily a positive one. Have you ever tried out any of the Pokemon games, Ryan?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Are you a fan of them?
They're not my cup of tea. I wouldn't play one for entertainment purposes, but I have a real appreciation for what they are.
And how would you grade them? Like how do you assess them? Do you feel like my supposition that they're more akin to Facebook games than video games is accurate?
Oh yeah, they're a Skinner box for sure.
Yeah.
I thought it was pretty funny that after you talked about all the things you didn't like about it, you said you were obsessively and compulsively playing it.
Yeah.
That's a hallmark of a Skinner box.
Yeah, I mean, it's baffling. And really, like I said, it's kind of all I've been doing, and I don't really have any good stories to tell either. That's the other problem with it. Like, when you play other games, you get good stories, and you go, oh my god, I was playing this, and this happened, and, like, all I can do is look at my son and go, my turtle evolved to Torterra.
Right.
It's like...
Well, yeah, but okay, so you have a shared experience with your son now.
Yes.
You both have done this gaming thing, right? So you have this common shared reservoir of experience that you can talk about that gives you something in context. And now that you've kind of entered the worldwide Pokemon community, you share that experience with millions and millions and millions of people.
Yeah.
You're an adult, so you have a lot of depth and richness to your life experience. But if you're 10 years old, you don't have a lot.
Yeah.
And, being able to instantly sit down with somebody that you just met for the first time on a school bus and have something to talk about in common is incredibly powerful.
That's a good point. That's a good point. So the other thing I have been playing is I've been doing some Gmod prop hunt with some of the other Mindcrackers, and I don't know if you've ever done these, but
No.
for those who are unfamiliar with the concept of prop hunt, I got introduced to it back in the TF2 days, and the idea is that you come in on a level and you pick an item from the level and you can mimic it, and then you can move around with it, and so you want to pick an item from the environment and then position yourself in such a manner that you will look like part of the environment. And then other people walk around with guns, and the more they shoot, the more health they lose. So their goal is to find the items in the environment that don't fit in and kill them.
Okay.
And it's really kind of an interesting exercise. And I played it back in the old TF2 days, and it was fun. But then, like, it started recurring a while ago with Gmod, and I think this is the superior exercise of this style of game, because Gmod has so many existing models and things like that they can fall back on, and people can create multiple environments. I'm going to be releasing a video later today where somebody made a Gmod prop hunt map of Walter White's house in Breaking Bad, and like all the things that you might think of, like, hiding the money in the baby's room. The vent in the baby's room opens and you can hide in there. Or, you can go down into there was obviously some thought put into the map, and it's got just really excellent multiplayer capabilities, especially for filming. So I've dabbled in Gmod over the years, and I know that there are a lot of really great mini games that have happened in Gmod, but I've been enjoying this particular round of it in particular more than others, to the point where now I want to actively seek out other Gmod games that I might enjoy. So what have you been playing lately, Ryan?
Well, last night I was playing Destiny.
How do you feel about it?
Brain around that. Well, that is the difficult question to answer. It's beautiful. It has a real feeling of quality to the product, and I would expect nothing less from Bungie, and I would certainly expect nothing less considering how much money they spent on it. But I don't find the game all that compelling so far. I'm a little bit like you in Pokemon. This game I don't find compelling. I've sunk a lot of hours into trying to figure out if I should like it or not. But so far, it's kind of leaving me a little flat.
I've watched some of the gameplay of it, and a lot of it seems to be solid, good shooter stuff, but the things that would make it excel in its environment don't seem to be there, other than being pretty and being a shooter.
You know, I believe that there's a big disconnect in what Destiny is. Because it's from Bungie, people thought they were making Halo the MMO, but what they've actually made is Mass Effect the MMO. And frankly, the Mass Effect game was just more fun to play than the Destiny game, even though they're telling almost exactly the same story.
Yeah, it's bad because I've got a free copy of it coming. I entered my clout score earned me a free copy of Destiny.
Okay.
And then they said you'll get it in 3 weeks. And like as soon as they said that, I went, that it's going to be over by then. Like it's not going to be a thing anymore. And I think that's the case. When I look at a lot of the Let's Players who are enjoying playing this game, they're excited to play it, but then I don't really hear many stories about things that actually happen in the game, much like my complaint about Pokemon. There's not much for me to share.
Yeah.
And so I don't know. Like I think basically what I'm probably going to do is find some second wave players and, you know, see who's enjoying it still.
Yeah. Yep. I think the experience could be different if you play with other people. So far, I've only played the game by myself. So I've got an action item on my list to get a group together and spend some time playing as a team, which you can't do in Mass Effect. So I think that's the big difference. And maybe it'll make the game more interesting to play.
So as a grown man, do you find the ability to get groups together like insanely difficult nowadays?
Yeah, it definitely comes and goes. You know, there's times when it feels like I could put a gaming group together in the blink of an eye because all of my friends are all playing exactly the same game at exactly the same time. But those occasions are becoming much fewer and farther between these days.
And do you, another interesting thing, do you think that most of the gaming trends ride that wave of new release? Like, do you and your friends ever coordinate on an older game at all?
No, we've never done that.
Isn't that weird? Like, I mean, I know that I've picked, like with role-playing games, there were times where I picked up archaic gaming systems that said, hey, I want to run a game. Let's do it. This is a fun game. And I don't see that very much in older video games.
Yep. Well, we just went through a console transition, so if I wanted to play Xbox 360 games, I have to unpack an old console that's already been packed away.
That's a good point.
That's a pretty big barrier to entry.
And do you think, like, I'm always amazed that backwards compatibility isn't becoming more primary. Do you think there will ever be a time where consoles decide to be backwards compatible again?
I had a backwards compatible PS3. So when I was at CCP had a pretty good relationship with Sony, and long before I arrived there, Sony had given CCP some PS3s that had the ability to play PS2 games. They had an Emotion Engine chip on the motherboard. They were never sold to the public. And I ended up with that machine. I inherited it, and I never used it to play a PS2 game. So even though it was totally capable of doing it, I never did it.
Wow.
And I kind of think the console guys know that that's the fact, that backwards compatibility, some people talk a lot about, but in actual fact, it would be a feature that was almost never used. Well, I think you have to go, it's not just one generation back, you have to go many, many generations back, which is why you see these emulators being so popular.
Yeah.
You know, I could play Joust, right, or some game from the 80s. That's cool, but that's not backwards compatibility. That's a whole different kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Huh. So what else have you been playing besides Destiny? Have you been doing any tabletop gaming?
I have not spent a lot of time on the tabletop lately. Most of my time right now is focused on Pathfinder Online, so my ability to kind of play other games is rapidly diminishing.
Yes. Well, you're a game designer. That's the way it works. Pretty much every single game designer, I don't have time to play games. I'm making a game. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
Well, okay. Well, let's move on and talk about some things that have been going on in the world. Eureka! Ow! So probably the biggest news of the week in gaming is Microsoft has purchased Mojang for $2.5 billion. And the comments go on wide. I mean, the ideas behind it about like whether it's a good or a bad thing are really, really varied, but they tend to focus on a couple of things. Number one, Microsoft is evil and should never own anything. Number two, Microsoft will take this cool indie product and ruin it. Number three, finally somebody with some business sense taking over Minecraft. And number four, who's Mojang?
Yeah. Exactly.
So like, first off, like one of the comments that I heard, $2.5 billion, that is a lot of money for an older game product that seems to have no intention of putting out a version 2. What do you think is going to the primary motivation behind the dollar figure there?
You know, here's a really interesting thing to think about. Last year, Microsoft had its biggest acquisition in history, and it was something that was the last significant act that Steve Ballmer made before he stepped down as CEO. It was something that was at the time described as transformative for Microsoft. They bought Nokia for $9 billion. So they basically paid a third of what they paid for Nokia to buy a video game.
Yeah.
That it's completely out of scope with everything Microsoft has done in the recent past, right? So at the end of the day, you know, if I'm looking at it from the outside, I'm saying, why in the world is Microsoft paying $2.5 billion for Minecraft? It has to be because the size of the Minecraft audience is not just a little bit bigger than the average gaming audience, but it is multiples, like 100x bigger than other video game player networks. And that's the same reason that you see these huge valuations for things like WhatsApp. It's not because they're successful, it's because they're 100 times more successful than the next entry in the same category. And I think Microsoft is just buying mindshare.
Well, and that's an interesting idea, and at this, like, there's also a lot of monetization. Like, I mean, WhatsApp, where's the monetization behind that? You know, sure. Paying a lot of money for some, but paying for, you know, the ownership of licensing of Minecraft products. There's a lot of money there. There's a lot of money behind. Yeah, I mean, Minecraft is still selling tremendous numbers.
Yes, millions of dollars a year.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a lot to be said for this, and if a company can leverage this into something good, I mean, good Lord, if nothing better, them getting into the education sphere as Minecraft has been digging into is something worth paying money for. Yep. But still,
well, don't forget that a lot of those Minecraft sales were direct to Mojang. Mojang has the contact information for all of those people. So that Microsoft now owns a database of millions of 6 to 15-year-olds who are going to be the people buying video games for the next 35 years.
Yeah.
It knows who they are personally.
Yeah. And you know, I joked around about how there was no necessary implication there would be a Minecraft 2, but now that Microsoft owns it, I think that's probably going to change.
If I was Microsoft right now, my strategy would be to continue to support Minecraft on all platforms because you don't want to create a PR negative, but you want the Xbox One version of Minecraft to just be better. Like, they don't have to actually do anything in terms of features to make it different. It just has to be better.
Yeah. Well, and I think that there's a lot to be said for, you know, if they were to go in, if nothing better, and clean up the Minecraft code, start from scratch, add a new level of complexity with the graphics, and put it out as Minecraft 2, I think most people would buy it. I don't think that would be a downside. I think a lot of people want to play Minecraft on some of these big multiplayer game servers, and they face some performance issues. That's why Optifine is even out there. And I think if they could clean up this Java code, make it something that runs better, that they would have a huge audience for a new product. And I think a lot of people kind of write that one off as well. So
yeah, there's a big upgrade path for them. It's a very lucrative deal. I mean, this is not a deal that doesn't have money in it. There is a lot of money in Minecraft. Yes. So that kind of helps offset the $2.5 billion purchase price.
Well, and imagine a BlizzCon-esque Minecon. There's a lot of money there too.
Yep.
So kind of in conjunction with that, for those who don't know, this was kind of a big decision for Notch, the creator of Mojang and Minecraft. He put out a very heartfelt letter that basically was saying, look, you know, I seem to have become a symbol for a lot of people, and that's not what I am. I'm just a nerd who likes making computer games. And I don't even necessarily like making whole computer games. I like making pieces of games. I like taking ideas and turning them into code. And that doesn't put me in a good position to be running a company or being a symbol for independent gaming. And he pointed towards a particular video called This Is Phil Fish. And I think it was brilliant of him to do it, because I think it's a message that a lot of people don't consider, especially with all of the Gamergate stuff that's been going on over the past few weeks. And that is that, you know, in general, in subcultures, there are people who end up becoming personifications of ideas or concepts less than they are the example of that person's ideology and thought processes. And Notch has certainly become that. There is no denying that a lot of people think Notch thinks a certain way. I have some very distinct friends who are like, I can't believe that Minecraft would sell out. That's so against Notch's philosophy. And I'm like, well, obviously it's not.
Your philosophy when you're a Scandinavian hacker working part-time gigs and living the life of a 20-year-old in Stockholm is one thing. Your perspective on life when you have $250 million in the bank is a whole different kind of thing.
Yes.
And that's what he was like before he was given over $1 billion to buy his company.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean,
Notch from 5 years ago is not the same Notch that exists today.
And another thing is that I want to point out to everyone listening, Notch is very clear to say this wasn't about money, and I believe him. I think he would have sold the company for, $500,000 if somebody hadn't been brokering better. This was because he needed some sanity, and he was tired of being a representative for something that he wasn't even necessarily in touch with anymore. He didn't have his hands on Minecraft anymore. He was a figurehead for the game, not necessarily someone deeply involved in continuing to evolve it. And so it's not about money, which is sort of where he was. And it's about following your passions, which is what he's sort of always said. And it's about doing the things that you enjoy because you enjoy them, which is kind of what he's doing. And so I don't see any ethical dilemma here. This is not a situation where Notch has sold out. Now, has he taken something that a lot of people cared about and put it in dubious hands? That's up for grabs. There's an argument to be made there. But I can't really argue with his decision or say that he was flawed in doing it.
Not only that, but he had two business partners. And, it's not necessarily clear that even if he didn't want to sell, that the deal wouldn't have happened.
Yeah.
I think he did want to sell. I think he was the triggering event. But if you're a third owner of a company that's worth $2.5 billion, and you're not getting the licensing royalty that Notch is getting, I could see there being a conversation that says, "Hey, I'd like to become a multi-hundred millionaire. Could you make that happen?"
Yeah, exactly. But at the same time, I also think that I don't think anyone involved with Mojang on any kind of a business level really made any decisions at all based on money. They're set for life. Really. They could have just stopped production on Minecraft, not done anything else, sat on their laurels for the next 20 years and made millions of dollars a year. While I can agree that there were more people involved in that decision, I don't necessarily think that. Now, unless somebody had some other business they wanted to buy, maybe they wanted to buy Nokia. I don't know. But anyway, but I do recommend everyone go check out the video. This is Phil Fish. It has a very poignant point, and I think a lot of people are forgetting it nowadays because we seem to have gotten deeply steeped in our subculture and kind of the myopic nature of communicating with people within our subculture. Small things on a global scale become grand things within our subculture. And Phil Fish is used as an example of someone who at 99.9% of all dinner parties in the world, no one will even know his name. And yet,
That's right.
And yet he's like this figurehead for some ideology that people have instilled him with that he doesn't even necessarily reflect. So yeah, I recommend everyone go check out that video and see that. One other thing, when talking about this stuff, you know, a little bit, we dabbled in Gamergate a little bit last week, and I want to point out to everyone that my stances on Gamergate are I think were pretty clearly presented in our last episode. But I do recognize that there are people out there who put noble intentions behind their support of this movement. I'm not in insulting what I consider to be the core of Gamergate. I don't necessarily think the people who are interested in it are bad people. Like, that's not the way that I'm looking at things. But I think that the rejection of certain of the people that are core in this movement is perhaps misguided. And one of the things I'll point out to is I read an article this week on The Verge that said, and it was Anita Sarkeesian giving a speech, and she said the most radical thing that you can do to support women online is actually believe women when they talk about their experiences. And I think this is a really, really ridiculously important point. I don't think most people, most feminists, are asking you to take a great leap of faith. They're saying, we've had these problems and we would like to talk about them publicly so that people are aware of them. And other people are saying, no, those aren't problems. No, you haven't experienced that. And I think that that's probably the lesson I've tried to learn the most from the past few years. And it's something I've tried to express in, I've been doing sexism and gaming panels at conventions. And the goal is to get women up to talk about their experiences. It's not necessarily to change anybody's minds about anything. It's to put people talking about what's going on in the general public and have that conversation be part of an open dialogue so that people can understand that male experiences in gaming are not necessarily the same as female experiences in gaming. And that there are voices out there that are saying, you guys are missing something. Will you please look at this? And we should listen to them. I'm not saying you have to put incredible faith in anything, but I think this is also reflected in, for instance, Anita Sarkeesian reported that she had received some death threats and had to get her family out of her house. And the first response was for some of the anti-Anita Sarkeesian people to call SFPD and say, did she ever call? And some bureaucrat policeman at a desk said no. And that person didn't necessarily know for sure whether they called or not. And suddenly the internet is like, Anita Sarkeesian lied. So basically what's happened there is that we've got two differing opinions about something that happened, and the default is to not believe the woman who makes the claim. Now, since then, evidence has come up that Anita Sarkeesian is actually interacting with the FBI, and the people who originally made these claims have said, okay, yeah, we messed that up, but the original claim is still out there, and people are still promoting the idea that Anita Sarkeesian is faking her being abused by people on Twitter and being doxxed and having all these bad things happen to her. Maybe we should believe her. Maybe we should listen to what she has to say. We can agree. We can all agree that these kinds of behaviors are bad, whether or not, this just blows my mind. And so I want to point out that probably the most challenging thing I'm asking anyone to do, and Anita Sarkeesian is agreeing with me here, is that you need to listen to women's experiences when they report them and take them seriously and not dismiss them because you don't believe in them. And I'll end the point there. So, similar to this whole caustic discussion on the internet, a few weeks ago, PewDiePie turned off his YouTube comments. For those of you who are on the board gaming side of things, you might not know who PewDiePie is, but he is the number one most subscribed person on YouTube, and basically he turned off the comments on his videos because it was a self-serving pit of advertisement and abuse. And I don't disagree with him. I think that in areas where there I think that if you look at the bottom of any like local newspaper website or state newspaper website, looking at the comments in those places is like peering into the depths of swill in humanity. I do not think that, I think the people who make comments on articles are usually the most caustic and aggressive of people, not the majority of opinions. I think most people are very moderate in their opinions and thought processes and don't feel inspired to comment. And I think that's why YouTube comments and news comments are not reflective of society as a whole. And I think that society is sometimes worse because this small group of very loud negative people gets amplified. Do you have any opinions on the idea of comments and things like that in newspaper and YouTube video?
I tell my wife all the time, never read the comments on the internet.
Yeah.
Every time.
Yeah.
They're horrible, right?
Yeah.
I think there's two kinds of internet communities. There's the kind of internet community where the community itself takes a proactive stance about maintaining a civil tone, and usually, but not always, that is related to the lack of anonymity, in that everybody who is in those communities knows who they are and they have reputations to protect, and they can't just be assholes, or they will lose access to the part of the community that they find interesting.
Yeah.
And then there's the generic anonymized internet community where this small percentage of humanity who are sociopaths has a field day eliciting negative emotions from the general public.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's funny because I moderate several political communities around the internet, and I do find that the longer the same people interact and get to know one another, the more people seek some kind of consistency, even if it's a faux consistency. Like, okay, sometimes you'll get somebody who is obviously a sock puppet caricature of a political stance, but they feel the need to maintain some kind of consistency, and that isn't, and people learn not to bite into that kind of trolly behavior, whereas you don't know that with the random internet audience. So, and I mean, I don't know much to comment here other than to say, yeah, go PewDiePie. Now, one thing I'll also notice, I noticed was that Total Biscuit turned off his comments, but then I noticed that he turned them back on. And I'm not sure how he's doing it yet. It might be that he's turning them off the first week that the video comes out, and then a few days later he's turning them on. But I noticed that the comments on some of his videos that he has turned on are suddenly constructive. And I wonder if maybe not having comments on for those first few days when the video goes out and the general consumption happens, and then opening the comments to the people who are regularly returning to your content there might be something there. There might be something in that that's a brilliant idea.
Yeah, that strikes me as something that has a high likelihood of being right. Yeah.
Also, and this is the last thing I'll comment, I've kind of picked on Total Biscuit because he says that a game is something that has a fail condition, but he thinks that Journey was his game of the year. One year, he actually did a video recently called In Defense of Specific Definitions. I actually think this is and he's got some good points, and I actually I'm much more on the same page with him now, even though I still think that Dear Esther is a game. And one of the things he says is that sometimes words are important, and attempting to communicate thoughts to people who are trusting my opinion requires me to have specific definitions. For instance, and he quotes, he says, for a particular game, some people have called it a roguelike because it has some procedurally generated elements to it. But roguelike has a specific meaning to the people who are listening to my show. And he doesn't feel that using that term to describe that game is sufficient to help people understand what they may or may not be purchasing. And I can agree with that. And he goes further to say that perhaps one of the problems is that people consider him saying Dear Esther to not be a game is a derogatory term. And I think that saying something isn't a game to people who consider themselves to be gamers is indeed a derogatory term. It's saying this is not something that will appeal. This is not something that you, the group I am normally addressing, should consider part of your subculture. And so anyway, go watch the video. It's got some interesting points. And Total Biscuit is always well-spoken, even when I don't agree with what he has to say. Inspiration. So let's talk some more about your work. Now you've pointed out that you were part of L5R and you wanted to be acquired by Wizards. What did you think Wizards could bring to your product? Why did you think that they would want your company?
Okay, so our thesis at the time was that Wizards, for reasons we didn't really understand, had not been able to replicate the success that they had had with Magic the Gathering. That most of the time when they tried to make a trading card game, it was not a success. They had a short-term success with Jihad, which became Vampire: The Eternal Struggle, and that game actually ran for a very long time after White Wolf took it over. But it rapidly kind of fell off the radar of a lot of players. And the Netrunner game kind of came out with a bang and then rapidly kind of vanished. And so, we had this idea that the people that were involved in Five Rings Publishing and the groups, the sub-teams that we had assembled to build trading card games, by distributing that effort across a lot of groups instead of one group, we thought we had kind of solved the problem for Wizards, that we could reliably create new, good trading card game franchises in a system that we had developed. So that if they were to acquire us, they would essentially be acquiring a downstream library of new trading card games to kind of feed into their system, their production system, their logistics system, their sales system, and could fill the hole that they looking at it from the outside, that they seemed to have, which was they weren't able to produce new, cool trading card game ideas that were successful. I would say that theory didn't necessarily survive contact with reality once we got inside the company. So what I thought I knew about Wizards from the outside turned out not to be so true when I was on the inside. But that was the theory before we were acquired.
Well, and that's interesting. What do you think it is that makes people interested in trading card games? Like, how has Magic been able to sustain this continued effort, and then something like Pokemon continued to be such an incredibly popular collectible card game, but then, L5R ends up being kind of this niche product that the people who really enjoy it, like, rave about it incessantly, but it never takes off big. What do you think is the key to success there?
It's an interesting thing in that the number of trading card games that are successful at establishing a long-term persistent player network is tiny. Like, it might be 5 games, maybe. Magic, L5R, Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh! I'm running out of names. It's really, really, really hard. Once those networks become established, they become self-sustaining. So one of the reasons Magic continues to be a big game is because Magic is a big game. That sounds like a tautology, but it's really the visible effect of the value of the network of players who all have a shared experience in that they know how to play Magic. And the fact that it's much harder to get a new player network to play a new game than it is to get more players to join an existing successful player network. So, you know, Magic is a successful game. It's really well designed, and it's surrounded by a huge ecosystem of tournaments and retail support and websites and iPad games and all that stuff. But fundamentally, the reason it's successful is because it is successful.
But I mean, at the same time, like, I never viewed L5R as being overwhelmingly successful, and yet it has sustained itself based on the passion of the people involved. How did that passion get inspired? How do you bottle that?
Yeah, well, that's the question, right? I mean, that's the thing we thought we had an answer to, that it turned out that we probably didn't have an answer to. We got lucky with Legend of the Five Rings. It wasn't. It was one of those situations where opportunity met preparedness, as my father likes to say. We got lucky because we were ready to get lucky. We were in the right place at the right time with the right product. And then we tried to replicate that. We tried to replicate it 5 or 6 times, and none of those games got lucky in the way that L5R got lucky. Yeah. You know, Legend of the Five Rings is a successful game. The game makes millions of dollars a year, and it has since 1997. So it's not a game like Magic that makes hundreds of millions of dollars a year, but it makes a pretty good living for the people that work on it. Yeah. There's very few properties in hobby gaming that are as successful as Legend of the Five Rings, but Legend of the Five Rings is a small game compared to Magic, and so people may tend to discount how successful it actually is, but it's pretty successful.
So after selling your company to and working with Wizards for a while, you moved to CCP, correct?
Yeah. So after the acquisition of Five Rings Publishing, I worked inside Wizards in a group called New Brand Development and Licensing, and that group was designed to create new intellectual properties for Wizards of the Coast. And I was in that group for about a year before I was asked to take over the Dungeons & Dragons business and the tabletop RPG business. So I worked on 3rd edition. I helped get the open gaming license created. And then after 3rd edition was released, the company was going through a lot of changes because Pokemon had blown up and because Hasbro had acquired the company. And it was time for me to exit, find my next adventure. So I had a startup for a while. I worked as a consultant. And I was sitting at a stoplight in Las Vegas working on a consulting gig, and I got a phone call from a headhunter who asked if I would consider taking a job in Reykjavik, Iceland. And apparently I was one of the very few people who said yes to that. So CCP is an Icelandic video game development company, and they have offices in Atlanta and Shanghai and in Manchester. In Newcastle. And their flagship product is a game called EVE Online, which is a science fiction sandbox game. And they were looking to add somebody to help them increase the impact of their marketing. So they were hiring what's called a chief marketing officer. That person's job is to oversee the worldwide sales and marketing efforts for all of the products that they were selling and all the products that they had in development, which at the time was World of Darkness, the MMO based on the White Wolf intellectual property. And I had always wanted to make the jump to MMOs since I left Wizards of the Coast. It was pretty obvious to me, even in the late 90s, that MMOs were likely to be the major successor to the tabletop RPG space. And so I had been looking for an opportunity to get into that business. And when the opportunity at CCP kind of landed on my doorstep, I jumped at it. And it was an amazing experience. I lived in Iceland for a year. And then my family and I relocated to Atlanta, and we lived there for 3 years. So I spent several months in Shanghai. You know, it was a broadening experience for me. I got to do a lot of world travel and see a lot of foreign cultures. I got to see a lot about how Europeans do business from the inside, which was really interesting. I got an exposure to one of the best MMO products that's ever been built. So it was awesome. I really loved it. And when my time at CCP ended, I wanted to stay in the MMO space, and that's how I hooked up with Paizo, and we decided to do Pathfinder Online.
Well, you were brought in to market, and I kind of look at Eve as sort of similar, in the same boat as L5R, in that it's not necessarily the biggest property, but the people who are into it are really passionate about it. Where's the difficulty marketing that passion to a general audience? Because I know that, like, I was kind of interested in getting into the idea of Eve, but like once I actually took a step in, I realized it was an alien world that I wasn't necessarily a constructive part of. And I'm not. Where was your challenge in marketing that to people like me who wanted to play but couldn't make the step?
Yes, I totally agree with everything you just said. Eve is a very difficult game to engage with, and the Eve community is a very difficult community to engage with. Once you have figured out how to make the game work and how to do things that are interesting in that game, and once you've made some connections inside the Eve community, it is an amazing, amazing experience. But that hurdle from new, disconnected person to experienced, well-connected person is the challenge at CCP when it comes to Eve. And they worked on it before I got there. It was the thing we worked on all the time I was there, and they're still working on it now. It's very, very difficult to make that transition happen. Well,
to me, it's also similar to like the Ingress. Have you ever poked around with Ingress at all? Google real world ARG kind of thing where you take the portals and you build the triangles all over the world. Anyway, I have enjoyed it, but it wasn't until I got really close to the big movers and shakers that I really got bit by the spirit. And I think probably Eve is the same way. Like if I ended up becoming part of a corporation that was ruling a large chunk of the galaxy, I might feel much more important. But as a guy mining rocks and returning home to buy to maybe get a 2% larger ship, it was a difficult. And then like the loss element of death and real world time in that game. Whew. So like I bet the whole like were you in how strongly were you invested in the World of Darkness side of things? And do you feel like that should have made it?
I was hired at CCP in November of 2007. And when I was hired, my job was to prepare the company to sell the World of Darkness MMO in 2 years. The reason that they were hiring a CMO is that they felt like they needed to have somebody who was able to continue to grow the Eve business and to build the whole system that would be necessary to launch and support World of Darkness, which was a game that CCP reasonably expected to be several orders of magnitude bigger than Eve. So I got there in 2007, and the game was supposed to be released in 2 years. I left in 2010, and the game was supposed to be released in 2 years. And when they decided to kill that game, they thought it at best could be released in 2 years. So in the course of 7 years of expensive and time-consuming development, they didn't manage to reduce the time to market by a day.
Yeah. Do you think it was a scope issue? Do you think they just kept? Was it that thing where they just kept increasing the scope, or was it a technology issue?
CCP is a success story and a failure story.
Yeah.
It is a success story in that a group of guys from Iceland stormed the gates of the global video game industry and bashed their way through those gates and found a place inside the castle. And it's so impressive to me that they did it. And knowing those guys, I'm impressed by all of them. They are ridiculously intelligent, super passionate, very committed individuals. And they did something that very few companies, very few groups of people are ever able to do. The problem that CCP has is that the way that they made Eve successful and the way that they built CCP, the company, didn't scale.
Yeah.
And the decisions that they made as they started to get bigger and as their organization became more complicated turned out not to be good choices.
Yeah.
So if CCP had said in 2007, we are going to stop working on Eve and everything else in this company, and we are going to exclusively become the World of Darkness company, they probably would have shipped the World of Darkness in 2 years.
Okay.
But the company and the people that run it just didn't have the ability to create an entity that was capable of doing Eve and Dust and World of Darkness and the FanFest and all the other projects that are inside the company no one's ever heard of. It didn't scale.
Right.
And that's unfortunate because I would have liked to have seen them be successful.
That's twice you've mentioned that there is good work that faces difficulties that limit it in ways that are not necessarily indicative of the work being done. You've mentioned that L5R and Pathfinder both were at the right place at the right time with an open opportunity and got lucky based on a tiny gap. And then you're saying with CCP they made it in, but because they're the way that growing works, even good products couldn't necessarily. How often do you feel that there are really good products out there that don't get a shake, not because that they're not good products, but just because opportunity or corporate infrastructure or public infrastructure are not in place to nourish that game or that product?
So I used to have a consulting company with a guy named Luke Peterschmidt, who you know. And Luke and I had a standard spiel that we would give our consulting clients when we sat down with them after we had reviewed their business and were prepared to make some recommendations. And we always told them that there was 3 things they had to do. Focus, focus, focus. It is the thing that screws up companies and organizations, is lack of focus. Many companies are built to do one thing really well. And when they have that laser-like focus and everybody is rowing in the same direction and the whole entity is built around the idea that this thing that we're doing has to be successful, that works. And then classically what happens is, after that first success, the company or the entity, the organization says, now that we've proven we can do this one thing successful, now we're going to try and do a bunch of things in parallel. We did it at Five Rings Publishing. It happened inside Wizards of the Coast. It's the reason World of Darkness didn't ship at CCP. It's a classic problem of focus. And when you take really successful, creative people and you tell them that you can't do something, it is so hard to make that stick. Many people have said that the brilliance of Steve Jobs wasn't that Steve Jobs knew how to say yes, it's that Steve Jobs knew how to say no. He was a guy who could go into a room and tell people to stop doing what they were doing. And that is a skill that is lacking in most organizations. Most organizations are built around enabling ideas, not disabling ideas. There aren't a lot of products that I would look at and say, this thing got all the way through development and got released and it got into the market and it's awesome and nobody knows about it and nobody likes it. That's really, really rare. I'm aware of dozens of products that I have either been involved in or know about or consulted on that were a great idea, being led by people who were super passionate about doing that thing, that didn't succeed. They didn't get to release, they didn't get to the market, or if they did get released, it got released in a watered down, compromised form that was so far from their vision it was almost not the same product. Focus, focus, focus. That's my advice I give to every organization that I work with. You have got to get focused.
So what are you using that strategy? How are you using that with Pathfinder Online? Where is the focus that you're going there?
Yeah, so the reason GoblinWorks exists is because Paizo Publishing is a company that is focused on making an awesome tabletop RPG and building an ecosystem to support it. And by staying focused on that mission, Lisa Stevens, who's the CEO, and Eric Mona, who's the publisher, have ensured that that company will remain successful. Now they are expanding the boundaries of what their tabletop gaming business means by adding things like the adventure card game, which is a product that they waited a long time to do, kind of the second leg on the table of Paizo's publishing success. But they didn't make a whole different kind of business. They didn't make a card game on a science fiction theme or a horror theme. They made the Pathfinder adventure card game. They're staying really focused. Pathfinder Online is a whole different kind of product than the things that Paizo builds. Video games they have a different salary structure. They have a different set of technical problems. They have different marketing concerns. There are all sorts of things you do in a video game company that you don't do in a tabletop gaming company. And so to keep Paizo focused on their tabletop business, they spun out an entity, GoblinWorks, to make this video game. And GoblinWorks is charged with making the best Pathfinder Online game that we can. And until we have successfully completed that goal and have that game running and growing and doing all the things we want it to do, we're not thinking about anything else. There is no plan for a second game at GoblinWorks. Everything we do is focused on making Pathfinder Online successful. So that's how we're kind of applying those rules of focus, in our own lives.
Well, and what elements of Paizo did you pull into this new endeavor, and which did you seek outside in the areas that they had been successful? For instance, did you grab anybody from CCP? Did you know what I'm saying? Like,
Yep. So, okay, yes, I did grab people from CCP. Fundamentally, we're staying with the Pathfinder intellectual property. And by that, I mean more than the mechanics of the Pathfinder tabletop role-playing game. I mean the world of Galarian and the stories and the characters and the background that Paizo has developed for Pathfinder. It's a great property, and it's a great fit with what we're trying to do, which is a sandbox fantasy game. So we don't have to draw outside the lines with Pathfinder. We're not stretching the Pathfinder intellectual property into places it's never been before. We're able to just stay with stock Pathfinder. We're not changing that world to make a video game. We're also working really hard to have continuity with Paizo's community. I said before that Paizo is a very community-focused company, and GoblinWorks has inherited that. We are also a very community-focused company. And the way we want to manage our community is very similar to the way that Paizo wants to manage its community. Paizo has just one really simple rule for its community: don't be a jerk. And it seems like that's just so simple it can't possibly work, but its very simplicity is an enabling factor that helps it function. People in our community know that if they act like jerks, they're going to get pushback, and if they keep acting like jerks, we'll ask them to leave. We would rather lose a jerky customer than let our community kind of degenerate. Yeah. So one of the very first things I did when I started GoblinWorks is I reached out to a friend of mine, Mark Calmes, who was the guy in charge of the World of Darkness engineering team, and prior to that, he had been a senior programmer at Cryptic. He worked on the City of Heroes and City of Villains games. And Mark joined our company as the Chief Technology Officer, and it's due to his expertise in both actually writing code and in knowing how to hire and manage and mentor engineers and programmers that we've been able to be as successful as we have. He's a key linchpin to that. We also hired a couple of people out of CCP. We hired a guy named Paul Gilmore, who is a programmer, and we've made a couple other hires that were related to CCP or people we knew through CCP. But we're not a CCP clone. We're not just trying to take a bunch of ex-CCP people and move them into GoblinWorks. Most of our staff did never work for CCP, so they're all new. We didn't hire anybody from Paizo. And that's not because there's not talented people at Paizo, but primarily because, number one, we didn't want to disrupt Paizo by taking their key staff out of their company, and number two, because the skill sets that make somebody an outstanding tabletop game developer and publisher aren't necessarily a good fit for making video games. So there are certainly people at Paizo that could work at GoblinWorks, but it was easier and made more sense from that kind of focused perspective to bring in new people from outside to staff up GoblinWorks. Yeah.
So let's talk about, and we'll wind this up. We'll kind of fast forward a little bit. Tell me what the state of Pathfinder Online is right now, and what you guys are looking for in the near future to make this product into something great.
The Pathfinder Online is trying to do a lot of things differently than what traditional MMO development efforts have done. And the biggest thing we're doing is we're trying to do it on a very, very, very small budget. So theme park AAA MMOs like WildStar or Elder Scrolls Online have budgets that are in the hundreds of millions of dollars. Our budget is in the $5 to $6 million range. So operating at a budget that's a fraction of the size of these AAA games means that we have to approach a lot of problems differently than they approach problems. And the biggest thing that we're doing is, instead of trying to spend 5 years in development and release a completely finished game where all the features are fully implemented, we are releasing our game in a state that we call the minimum viable product. Down in Silicon Valley, there's a lot of thought that goes into this idea of the lean startup, and the idea that if you try to build every feature in your company before you start selling it to your customers, you have created a huge overhang of risk that the stuff you've tried to build isn't a good fit with your market. And one of the ways that you can address that problem is by going to market as soon as you have a usable version of your product. So our minimum viable product is a fantasy sandbox. You play characters in the world of Galarian, the Pathfinder homeworld, in an area of Galarian called the River Kingdoms, which is kind of a middle European forested area where there are no big national entities, and it's kind of a free-for-all. Small groups can create settlements and kind of dominate territory, but only kind of as far as they can exert their local forces. So it's very flexible, and there's a lot of turnover in terms of power bases and organizations. The players are characters in that world who may be heroic adventuring characters like the Pathfinder tabletop RPG characters, or they might be characters in a much larger context. They could be diplomats and merchants and crafters and soldiers, not just characters that fight monsters. So our minimum viable product is that we have established a really large world to adventure in. The current world map is 17 kilometers by 7 kilometers, and it is a third as big as the map will be in 2 weeks. And on that map, there are encounters where you can fight monsters, and there are resources where you can harvest valuable inputs to the economy. That's the first loop, is this kind of experience with the environment, fighting monsters and harvesting resources. And then there's an economic loop where the resources that get harvested from the wilderness get turned into useful items in the towns. The crafters take the inputs that are generated in the wilderness, they go through a couple of stages of crafting, and then they produce stuff that the people that are out in the wilderness can use to fight tougher monsters and harvest more complicated resources. So that's the second game loop. And those two loops interlock. The people who are in the wilderness, they want to constantly be upgrading their gear so they can take on tougher challenges. And the people that are in the settlements doing the crafting are constantly trying to increase the quality and the attributes of the stuff they can craft because they think that's interesting and because that's what their purchasers, what their market, the wilderness people would like to buy.
Well, that's good.
In the middle,
oh, go ahead.
In the middle, there's a PvP loop, right? So the thing that kind of connects these two groups together is there's a lot of PvP. You can attempt to stop the people of the wilderness from doing what they're doing, or you can try to interfere with the economy of moving stuff from place to buy and sell. And that complication creates a really interesting dynamic world where the players are fully engaged in persistently altering the way the world functions on a minute-to-minute basis.
Do you think that there's an interesting kind of mirror that in order to move to the next generation of game, we're looking at some of the first generation of MMOs? You're basically looking at kind of an Ultima online model of gameplay. And that fascinates me. You know, you look at things like and then trying to pull in elements of the Star Wars online game, Galaxies. I really think it's kind of an interesting symmetry that we're still pursuing some of the large online experiences that we dreamed of when we first started entering this environment. Yes,
you're 100% correct. You know, Ultima Online, which was the first significantly successful commercial MMO, was a sandbox game. And one of the lessons that the industry took away from that game are that sandboxes are hard and sandboxes are toxic.
Yeah.
And the industry went 180 degrees the opposite direction with EverQuest, and then really was refined with World of Warcraft. And because World of Warcraft was so enormously successful, it created a vortex that kind of sucked in all the money and all the design talent in the MMO space. You know, for close to a decade. Yeah. Everybody tried to make a World of Warcraft clone. Nobody tried to make an Ultima Online clone.
Yeah. Okay, well, I think we'll start winding things up a little bit. Do you have anything else that you want to pimp about what you're doing?
We are in the process right now of completing our alpha test, and we are going to begin what we call early enrollment, which is a little bit like a Steam early access experience. That is currently scheduled to start on the 25th. That date is based on the successful completion of alpha, so it's subject to change. And if you want to participate, you can visit goblworks.com, and access to early enrollment starts at $100, and it goes down based on when you want to begin playing.
Okay, that sounds really amazing. I have some guests booked coming up soon. I actually have some planned guests. I've been able to contact people and reach them. First off, in 2 weeks, we'll have Will Overgard of A Creative Assembly. They're the people who make the Total War games. They're going to be coming on. He and maybe Craig. I'm not sure if Craig's going to be able to join us or not yet, but definitely will. And that will be a great show. I have talked with someone else about being on next week. It is someone who is interested in being on the show. So my dreams of being able to return to a weekly production schedule are slowly but surely winding up, maybe, sort of, maybe not surely. But anyway, those things are good. If you want to, you can always go to coreelementshow.com, listen to old episodes. Go to our YouTube channel, Core Elements Show on YouTube, and see videos of stuff I've done over the past, 8-9 months. There's some really good episodes there, and I hope you'll join us in the future. Ryan, it was a real pleasure. I felt like when I contacted you, I'm like, this is someone who has been deeply steeped in gamer life and business development for years and years. I was excited about getting you on, and I appreciate you coming on and talking with us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Okay, and everybody else, have a good day. You've been listening to Core Elements, exploring gaming one element at a time, a listener-supported podcast. See the show notes or get more information at coreelementshow.com or leave us a voicemail at 256-763-0455.